Hey guys, tonight we're stepping straight into the mud, the noise, and the naive excitement of the American Civil War. Imagine yourself back in the 1860s. You're not watching from a safe classroom or comfy couch. No, tonight you're lacing up boots that pinch your toes, tugging at a wool uniform that smells faintly of mothballs and anxiety, and you're about to march off toward a war that will chew you up and spit you out. You probably won't survive this, honestly, but for the sake of our story, let's pretend you do. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment below with your location and local time. I always love to see where in the world you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun is rising, hot and hazy, as you shoulder your knapsack and kiss the familiar world goodbye. Behind you are furrowed fields, the squeak of a barn door, maybe the cry of a mother or sweetheart waving from the gate. Ahead of you stretches the dirt road into town, where men your age and boys younger are gathering around the recruitment table. It's a strange carnival atmosphere, almost festive. Someone's beating a drum, another is waving a flag, and you're swept up in the rhythm of the crowd. You're not thinking about death, disease, or what it feels like to have cannon fire shake the earth under your ribs. You're thinking about adventure, glory, and maybe even impressing that girl who turned you down last fall. You sign your name, the pen scratching across paper like a ticket into another universe. Within hours, you're issued your first uniform. It doesn't quite fit. It never does. Maybe the pants sag, maybe the jacket squeezes, and the shoes feel like they were designed for someone with square feet. But you stand taller anyway. The mirror doesn't show a farmhand anymore, it shows a soldier. And that's intoxicating. You fall into line with others, many of them wide-eyed like you, carrying the same jumble of fear and pride. Drums beat out a rhythm, and your boots scuff in time as the column begins to move. Civilians cheer. Little kids wave handkerchiefs, women throw flowers. Someone thrusts a pie into your hands, still warm, as if sugar and apples will protect you from bullets. And here's the quirky detail. A lot of townsfolk really believed pies and good wishes could shield their boys. Historians still argue whether it was genuine superstition or just the desperate hope of people sending loved ones into the unknown. The first days of marching are almost fun. The countryside is familiar, rolling hills, fences you recognize, barns that look like home. You march with friends, swap jokes, sing songs. John Brown's body gets stuck in your head like the world's first annoying earworm, and you belt it out anyway. The rhythm of boots and the creak of leather feels like something out of a grand story. Your sergeant, voice like gravel, shouts for order, but even he cracks a smile when someone sneaks in a bawdy verse. But by the second week, the cracks begin to show. Your feet blister in those stiff shoes. The knapsack feels like it's filled with bricks, even though it only holds a blanket, a tin cup, some underwear, and that hard, square cracker they call hardtack. Your back aches, your legs throb, and you wonder why every road seems uphill. That excitement you had on the first day is still there, but it's softened, tempered by reality. You're introduced to the real soundtrack of soldiering. The coughs of men who haven't slept, the curses of someone whose shoe sole just tore away, the constant slap of mosquitoes. The countryside seems to stretch forever. Sometimes you trudge in silence, only the sound of boots and breath and distant crow calls filling the air. And the worst part, you still haven't seen a battlefield. You're tired, dirty, and irritable, and the real war hasn't even begun. One night, you camp in a field under a sky littered with stars. You spread your blanket, lie down on the lumpy ground, and try to ignore the snores and farts of the men around you. The smell of smoke from the campfire clings to your clothes, and the night air bites colder than you expected. Your stomach grumbles. You pull your jacket tighter and try to dream of home, but the sound of distant cannon fire carries on the wind. Faint, like a drum in the bones of the earth. For the first time, it hits you. This isn't just adventure. It's war. The next morning, you march again. Along the road, you see stragglers, men who couldn't keep up. Some sit in the dust with blistered feet, others cough so hard they can't stand. Officers shout, horses snort, and you feel the first true taste of exhaustion. And yet, you keep moving because everyone else is moving. There's no room for hesitation. By the time you reach a larger camp near the front, you look less like a farm boy in a costume and more like a soldier who belongs. Your boots are scuffed, your face sunburned, your hair damp with sweat and dust. The crowds and cheering townsfolk are far behind now. Nobody hands you pies anymore. Here it's only lines of tents, the smell of unwashed men, and the knowledge that just beyond the horizon lies your first battle. And as you sink onto your blanket that night, gnawing on a piece of hardtack so hard you nearly break a tooth, you realize something simple and chilling. You started this journey as part of an army, but every step forward is also a march away from the person you used to be. The camp at the edge of the battlefield is nothing like the festive send-off you had back home. Here, the air hangs heavy with smoke, sweat, and the faint metallic tang of cannon barrels that have already been fired in anger somewhere down the road. You wake up to the sound of bugles and the bark of orders instead of roosters or church bells. Rows of tents stretch in uneven lines, their canvas stained from rain and mud. Men move like ants in every direction, hauling buckets of water, sharpening bayonets, dragging wagons loaded with ammunition. The whole place feels alive, buzzing with a nervous energy that makes your stomach twist. You stumble out of your tent, blinking in the weak morning light. Breakfast is, well, if you can call it that. Salt pork, coffee so bitter it tastes like ground-up tree bark, and the same slab of hardtack you've gnawed on for days. Someone jokes that hardtack lasts forever because nothing, not even mold, wants to eat it. You laugh because it's true, but the sound catches in your throat. Your mouth is too dry from the dust. Around you, soldiers are fidgeting, some pacing, some sitting still with vacant eyes. A few write letters home, scratching out words on scraps of paper that might never be delivered. Others hum hymns or whistle to keep their hands steady. You realize you're in that strange limbo before the first battle, close enough to smell the powder, far enough that you have time to think about it. That's the cruelest part. Thinking. When the order comes to drill, you shuffle into line. The sergeant shouts, his voice hoarse, as you raise and lower your musket again and again. Aim. Fire. Reload. Over and over. Your arms ache, your fingers blister, your brain fogs from the monotony. But the repetition serves a grim purpose. Soon, when the air fills with smoke and your heart hammers against your ribs, muscle memory will be the only thing keeping you alive. Historians still argue whether Union or Confederate drill masters trained men better, but the truth is, both sides knew that hesitation meant death. As the day drags on, you hear stories whispered around campfires. Someone talks about Bull Run, the first big clash. How crowds of civilians had come with picnic baskets, expecting a quick and entertaining victory, only to run screaming when cannonballs whistled overhead. Another man swears he saw soldiers drop their rifles and run, clogging the roads back to Washington like panicked cattle. The story makes your skin crawl. You try to tell yourself it's just gossip, exaggerated like any camp tale, but the look in the storyteller's eyes suggests otherwise. That night, you can't sleep. Every creak of a wagon wheel, every neigh of a horse, every cough from the next tent makes you jolt awake. The stars above seem sharper than ever, like they're cutting holes in the sky. You pull your blanket tighter, pressing your musket close to your body, like a lifeline. You try to imagine home, but the images blur with the sounds of men crying softly in the dark. No one talks about that in the history books, the quiet tears shed by farm boys who suddenly realize they might not see another summer. At dawn, the bugle calls again. This time, the camp moves with a different urgency. You're ordered to pack up, shoulder your gear, and fall into formation. Officers shout, horses rear, drums pound out a rhythm that matches the thud of your heart. The column begins to march, not toward practice fields, but toward the front. Dust rises in clouds around your boots, choking you. The air grows hotter, thicker, charged with something you can't quite name. And then, like a storm breaking, you hear it. The deep boom of artillery rolling over the hills. It's distant at first, almost like thunder, but soon the rhythm quickens, sharper, closer. Musket fire rattles like firecrackers in the distance. Birds scatter from the trees, and your stomach drops. This is no drill. As you crest a ridge, the scene unfurls below, a wide, open field, already scarred by cannon smoke. Lines of men in blue and gray face one another across the grass, their rifles flashing in the morning light. The sound is overwhelming, cannons roaring, muskets cracking, officers screaming, men howling in pain. The air smells of sulfur, sweat, and churned earth. And in that moment, standing on the edge, you realize this is it. The thing you've been preparing for. The moment where excitement and fear collide in your chest like two armies of their own. The order comes. You're to advance. Your legs move before your brain can stop them, boots pounding the earth in rhythm with your company. The field rushes toward you, every detail burned into your senses, the wildflowers crushed underfoot, the smoke curling like ghosts above the grass, the frantic beating of your own heart. For a surreal moment, it almost feels like a play, like you're watching yourself from outside your own body. But then, the whistle of a cannonball tears through the air, and the ground erupts beside you in a spray of dirt and screams. The illusion shatters. This isn't a story you're reading. This is war, and you're inside it. The first step into the battlefield feels like sinking into another world. The earth trembles beneath your boots, not from your own weight, but from the relentless pounding of artillery. Every time a cannon fires, the ground gives a deep shudder, as if the soil itself wants to crawl away from this madness. The smoke is so thick that you can't see more than a few yards ahead. It clings to your clothes, fills your nose, and burns your throat until every breath feels like swallowing hot ash. Your officer's voice cuts through the haze, a mixture of command and desperation. Steady. Keep the line. You grip your musket tighter, the wood slick with sweat. The soldier to your right mutters a prayer under his breath. The one to your left coughs violently, already choking on the sulfur fog. You march forward anyway, because stopping is not an option. The sound of musket fire builds around you, sharp cracks that merge into a rolling thunder. It's disorienting, like standing inside a drum while someone beats it furiously. You raise your musket when ordered, aim at shadows in the distance, and fire. The recoil jolts your shoulder, the smoke from your own shot mixing with the chaos already choking the field. You fumble through the drill you practiced endlessly in camp, bite the cartridge, pour powder, ram the ball, prime the pan, fire again. Your hands shake, but the motions are burned into your muscles. Somewhere to your left, a man screams. You don't look. You can't. Looking means breaking the fragile rhythm, keeping you alive. Historians still argue whether soldiers in these early clashes really aimed to kill or just fired in the general direction of the enemy, hoping the sheer wall of lead would do the job. Standing here, it doesn't feel like aiming at all. It feels like chaos, like throwing stones into a storm and praying one hits. And then the enemy line comes into view. The gray uniforms blur through the smoke, their faces set, their rifles flashing as they return fire. You see men stagger, fall, vanish into the grass. You fire again and again, until your musket feels like part of your body, until the thunder in your ears drowns out all thought. The world shrinks to powder, smoke, and the endless pounding of your heart. The first cannonball lands close, too close. It plows into the ground, sending dirt, grass, and parts of men flying in all directions. You're showered in soil, your ears ringing so badly you can't hear yourself gasp. For a heartbeat, everything tilts, like the world itself has been knocked sideways. You force your legs to keep moving, though every instinct begs you to drop flat on the ground. Somewhere behind you, a flag rises high, rippling through the haze. The standard bearer stumbles, but keeps it raised, the bright fabric a desperate beacon in the chaos. You don't know whether to feel reassured or horrified, because that flag marks you as a target just as much as it guides your men forward. A quirky little detail here. Soldiers often joke that carrying the colors was both the highest honor and the fastest way to get shot. Few men volunteered willingly, and those who did were either extremely brave or extremely unlucky. Suddenly, your line halts. The smoke parts just enough to reveal what lies ahead. A wide stretch of open ground, no cover at all, separating you from the Confederate position. You realize this is it, the dreaded open advance. The order is given, and you surge forward with the others, muskets held tight, your bayonet glinting faintly in the murky light. The air becomes a storm of lead. Bullets snap past your ears like angry hornets, so close you swear you feel the heat of them. Men drop beside you, some with cries, some silently, folding into the dirt like puppets with cut strings. Your boots slip in the churned mud, your mouth dry as dust, your brain screaming at you to turn and run. But you don't. You keep moving because the press of bodies behind you leaves no choice. The Confederate line grows clearer with every step. The flashes of their muskets, the grim set of their shoulders, the way their hats barely move in the haze. You're close enough now to see faces, young and old, twisted with the same fear you feel yourself. It strikes you, even in this madness, how alike you all are. Farm boys, clerks, husbands, sons. And yet here you are, driving steel and lead at one another because the men in power have drawn lines on a map. The clash comes suddenly, brutally. Muskets fire at near point-blank range, the sound deafening, the smoke suffocating. Bayonets lower. Men crash together in a frenzy of shoving, shouting, and sheer survival. You lunge with your own weapon, the world dissolving into fragments, an arm raised, a face snarling, the press of a body too close to yours. The fighting is clumsy, desperate, nothing like the neat drills you practiced. A cannon roars somewhere to the flank, and you feel the shock wave ripple through the ground. Your teeth rattle. The flag wavers but stays upright. Around you, men are grappling, stumbling, shouting for water, for help, for mercy. And yet, amid the chaos, the line somehow holds. You're still standing, still fighting, still alive. But survival in this storm is slippery. A thought creeps in, sharp as the bayonet in your hands. You probably won't survive this. Not today, not tomorrow, not if this is what every battle looks like. The weight of that truth settles heavy on your chest. And still, you push forward because the alternative is worse. The battle doesn't end with a clean stop. It drags, sputters, and lingers like a fever that won't break. The noise lessens by degrees, though your ears still ring as though cannons are firing inside your skull. Smoke curls low across the field, hanging stubbornly in the air, like it enjoys the taste of blood and sweat. You try to breathe, but every breath still stings of sulfur and ash. The order comes to halt. You slump down where you stand, your knees nearly buckling. Around you, the field is a patchwork of broken bodies, abandoned weapons, and trampled grass. You force yourself not to stare too long at the faces, some familiar, some not. Looking too closely risks realizing how many you'll never see again at roll call. And here comes the cruelest twist of all. The fighting isn't even the worst part. The waiting is. You're stuck on this battlefield long after the guns fall quiet, marooned between what just happened and what will come next. The silence feels heavier than the noise. Every crack of a branch, every cough, every distant hoofbeat makes you jump like a startled horse. You clutch your musket even though your hands ache, knuckles stiff from gripping it too long. The officers walk the line, muttering instructions, counting heads, giving orders that sound far calmer than they must feel. Someone near you is crying, not loud sobs, but small, broken whimpers, like a child trying not to be heard. You want to tell him to hush, but your throat is too dry, your own voice too weak. Instead, you sit in the thick quiet, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Historians still argue whether Civil War battles were truly continuous, or more a series of pauses broken by violent bursts. Standing here, you know the truth. It's both. The guns thunder, men charge, lines crash together. But then there's this. The limbo afterward, the waiting that stretches minutes into hours. The war doesn't only kill with bullets, it gnaws at nerves and patience, too. Night begins to fall, bringing no relief. If anything, it's worse. The smoke drifts low, mingling with the dusk, and the battlefield becomes an eerie blur of shadows. Lanterns flicker in the distance where the wounded lie, small signals that life clings on stubbornly. You hear groans rising, scattered across the dark field like some dreadful chorus. They seep into your bones, those sounds, and you know they'll haunt your dreams even if you ever manage to sleep again. One soldier near you mutters that the groans are worse than the cannon fire. Another swears he can tell which cries are Union and which are Confederate. You don't want to think about it, but your ears pick up patterns anyway. Some voices call for mothers, others for God, others for water. None call for victory. Here's a quirky tidbit that almost feels absurd in this moment. Soldiers often compared the pauses between battles to waiting for a thunderstorm. They described the tension in the air, the way animals seemed restless, the way even the wind felt charged. One man even claimed he could smell the next fight coming, like rain on the horizon. You can't say he was wrong. Right now, the air tastes of iron and dread, and the storm hasn't truly passed. The wounded lie just yards away, but you can't go to them. Orders are strict. Hold the line. Don't break formation. Don't risk exposing the unit. That's the part no one tells you about. How many men died not because help wasn't nearby, but because help wasn't allowed. You sit frozen, listening to their voices fade into silence one by one, and you wonder which silence is worse, the screaming that stops or the crying that doesn't. Somewhere, an officer tries to cheer the men with talk of honor, of bravery, of holding the field. His voice floats hollow in the smoky air, words that sound almost comical against the backdrop of death and exhaustion. You glance at your comrades. Their faces are gaunt, streaked with dirt and powder, their eyes glazed with fatigue. Nobody looks convinced. Honor feels like a faraway luxury when your stomach gnaws from hunger and your canteen is empty. And then there's the fear that the enemy might charge again in the night. Every rustle in the brush becomes a possible attack, every shadow a potential Confederate creeping forward. You clutch your musket tighter, your muscles screaming for rest, but refusing to release their grip. You know you need sleep, but how do you close your eyes when the world feels ready to explode at any second? The moon rises pale above the haze, casting the battlefield in an otherworldly light. You find yourself staring at it, wondering if the soldiers on the other side of the lines are looking at the same moon, thinking the same thoughts. Maybe they're just as hungry, just as scared, just as tired. The thought doesn't make it easier. It just makes it stranger. And then comes the worst moment of all. The waiting in the silence is broken by a single cannon boom in the distance. Not close enough to be an attack, not far enough to ignore. Just a reminder that tomorrow, or even tonight, the storm could break again. You draw your knees to your chest, close your eyes, and try to imagine something else. Home, maybe. A porch swing, a cool drink, a warm bed. But the images don't stick. They dissolve into the groans, the gunpowder, the endless, heavy quiet of the battlefield that refuses to let you go. Dawn creeps in slow, pale, and merciless. The smoke still hangs over the field, but the rising sun filters through it in long streaks of gold and ash, turning the battlefield into something eerie, almost painted. You blink against the light, your eyes gritty from a night of half-sleep that never reached real rest. Your stomach growls, and your tongue feels like leather. Morning doesn't bring peace. It just makes every hardship clearer in the harsh light. The wounded are still there, scattered across the field like discarded dolls, their groans weaker now, some silenced altogether. The order finally comes to gather them in, and you move out with the others, stepping carefully among bodies you try not to look at too closely. Some men you knew by name, others by laugh, others only by the sound of their boots in the march. Now they're just still shapes in the grass, their faces pale against the churned dirt. You help lift the wounded, some conscious and clutching at you desperately, others limp as sacks of grain. The weight is almost unbearable, not just on your shoulders, but in your heart. One man grips your sleeve with bloodied fingers and begs for water, his eyes wide, fever bright. You give him a sip from your canteen, even though it means less for you later. He smiles weakly, as though you've given him something greater than life itself. That smile will haunt you longer than his wound. Then there are the ones too far gone. The surgeons move among them with grim efficiency, marking those who can be saved and those who can't. You hear words you never wanted to hear spoken so casually: mortal, hopeless, let him be. The line between life and death is drawn not by the will to live, but by the scarcity of hands and supplies. You carry one comrade into a makeshift field hospital, a large barn stripped of its animals and filled now with rows of straw mats. The smell hits first: blood, sweat, urine, and something metallic and sharp that makes your stomach turn. The surgeons are already at work, their sleeves rolled, their hands slick. Tools clatter in buckets. Sawdust covers the floor, dark with stains. Here's the grim fact: most Civil War deaths didn't come from bullets. They came from infection, from fever, from wounds left to rot. Historians still argue whether medicine advanced because of the war, or whether the sheer horror simply revealed how far behind it was. Either way, standing in that barn, you realize the battlefield didn't end when the shooting stopped. It just moved inside. You see amputations happening in quick succession. A leg sawed off in under 10 minutes, no anesthesia except a swig of whiskey and men holding the patient down. A boy no older than 16 bites down on a leather strap, his eyes rolling back as the surgeons saw screeches through bone. You look away, but the sound burrows into your skull. There's no escaping it. Quirky tidbit here, though it hardly feels light. Some surgeons toss severed limbs out the windows to form grim piles outside hospitals. Men joked about it, calling them meat markets, though the laughter was brittle, the kind that hides tears. Later, dogs and pigs picked through the heaps. You don't want to believe it, but you've seen too much already not to. And then there's the fever. Even men with minor wounds lie shaking, their skins slick with sweat, their breaths shallow. Doctors mutter about miasma, bad air that spreads sickness. They wave cloths soaked in vinegar, sprinkle carbolic acid where they can, but the truth is plain. Nobody really understands infection yet. You hear whispers about Florence Nightingale's reforms overseas, but here it's guesswork and prayer. You're put to work hauling water, fetching cloth, holding men steady while surgeons work. Every task feels endless. The cries echo in your ears until you think you'll never hear silence again. Sometimes the cries stop, and you realize you're holding someone who just slipped away. You lay him down gently, but inside something cracks. And still, amid the horror, there are small acts of grace. A nurse, rare but present, moves among the men, her voice soft, her hands steady. She hums a hymn as she sponges a soldier's forehead, and for a moment the barn feels almost human again. You catch yourself clinging to that sound like a lifeline. The hours crawl. Outside, the sun climbs higher, baking the field where the dead still lie. The burial details are at work now, digging long trenches and laying bodies in side by side. You hear the dull thud of dirt hitting cloth, a sound that carries a finality the surgeons' saws never could. One comrade whispers that the enemy buries their dead better. You don't answer. You don't want to think about comparisons. And yet, the strangest thing is how quickly the human mind adapts. By midday, the screams feel almost normal, the smell less sharp. You go through the motions without thinking. Carry, fetch, lift, hold. Your hands are stained, your clothes stiff with sweat and blood, and you don't even flinch anymore. It scares you, that numbness. You wonder if it means you're losing something you won't get back. When the surgeons finally pause, their faces gray with exhaustion, you slip outside for air. The field is quieter now. The wounded who could be saved are inside, the dead covered with blankets or buried already. The silence feels different than yesterday's. It's not tense, not waiting. It's heavy but final. You sit down in the grass, ignoring the mud, ignoring the stains. You stare at your hands, shaking slightly, and wonder how long this war can possibly last. You've survived another day, another night, another morning. But survival feels thinner now, stretched taut, fraying at the edges. The battle may have ended, but you know the war hasn't. And if this is what passes for survival, you wonder how much more you can endure. The next morning rises heavy and gray, a dull promise that the day will bring more of the same, only slightly altered. Mist clings to the fields like a damp cloak, soaking your boots and chilling your knees as you trudge across churned earth. The air smells faintly of smoke and rotting vegetation, a reminder that yesterday's battle left scars the eye can see, and some that it cannot. You pull your coat tighter, though warmth is a fleeting comfort here. The chill is in your bones. Orders arrive quickly. There's no time for reflection, only motion. You march alongside men whose faces are already sallow from sleepless nights and poor rations. Each step sinks into mud. Each breath carries the scent of iron and ash. The landscape is pockmarked with holes where cannonballs struck, the trees splintered and blackened as if the sky itself had lashed out. And yet, soldiers joke about lucky trees and friendly mud, a brittle humor meant to keep panic at bay. You probably won't survive this. Your mind whispers with a half grimace, half joke that you don't dare share aloud. You reach the creek where water is drawn and the men bend low to drink. The water is murky, muddied from hoof and boot, yet it feels miraculous on your parched tongue. You sip cautiously, remembering tales of dysentery running through armies faster than bullets. Historians still argue whether contaminated water or spoiled rations caused more deaths in the average campaign. You think it doesn't matter right now. It all feels deadly enough. Breakfast is a meager affair. Hardtack and thin soup, served cold in tin cups. You gnaw at the biscuit, the grain scratching your throat, while you watch a comrade try to light a fire with soaked kindling. Sparks dance briefly before sputtering out, and you remember a quirky tip your father once gave about using crocodile dung, style makeshift fire starters. Crude, impossible, and faintly hilarious, but practical in theory. Here, the joke feels like a relic from another world. Soon, your unit is ordered forward. The ground is slick, the soldiers' boots suction to the mud, the air thick with smoke from distant artillery. You trudge over the terrain, muscles already aching from lifting, digging, and carrying the wounded yesterday. Every step is an argument with gravity, your arms heavy with fatigue and the lingering weight of yesterday's horrors. You remind yourself that survival is a skill, not luck. Cavalry scouts appear on the ridge, their horses restless, nostrils flaring. Orders are shouted, whistles pierce the fog, and suddenly you are part of a greater motion, lines of men shifting like pieces on a bloody board. Cannon fire cracks from afar, a staccato warning. The vibrations move through the earth, under your feet, through your chest. It's loud enough to rattle teeth, to make your knees wobble, but you force them steady. Then comes the first skirmish of the day. Smoke curls over the hill as bullets zip past in sharp, terrifying whines. Men fall around you. Not all are hit, but the ones who make the air feel alive with panic and disbelief. You flinch at the sound of someone shouting for a brother or friend, their voice breaking under fear. You grip your rifle tighter, though part of you is still trying to remember the boyish dream of heroism you had before reality intruded. You duck behind a rise, heart hammering, the mud sucking at your hands as you brace. A soldier next to you wipes sweat and grime from his brow, muttering about the luck of the day while adjusting a strap. There's a rhythm to this chaos, a cruel pattern. Advance, pause, retreat, tend, repeat. You realize that battle is less about glory than endurance. Those who survive do so by noticing the smallest opportunities, by keeping their wits when panic threatens. The fight continues with bursts of intensity and stretches of eerie calm. You move between men, handing out water, helping the wounded crawl to cover, whispering encouragements you don't quite believe yourself. Quirky as it seems, some soldiers carry charms or trinkets for luck. A rabbit's foot, a tiny coin, a patch sewn inside a uniform. Superstition mingles with necessity here. Every edge against death counts, no matter how ridiculous. As the sun climbs, the battle drags on. You notice how fatigue changes perception. Trees become taller, mud deeper, smoke thicker. You hear historians still argue whether mental strain or physical exhaustion claims more soldiers during prolonged campaigns. Here it's both, each compounding the other, each demanding your attention in equal, crushing measure. Midday brings a lull. You collapse behind a fallen log, shaking, chest heaving, mud-stained hands pressed to your knees. A comrade whispers about letters from home, about missed birthdays, about dreams left unfinished. You nod silently, imagining those ordinary lives as faint lights on a distant shore, almost mocking in their normalcy. The lull doesn't last. Orders arrive, regroup, advance, hold the line. You get to your feet, tasting dirt and iron in your mouth, body trembling with tension. Even as exhaustion weighs on you, you know every step forward matters. Not all heroes carry swords. Some carry water, stretch bandages, whisper courage. You are one of those heroes now, in a world that refuses to pause for sentiment. By evening, the battlefield has transformed again, smoke-laden, littered with spent cartridges, and echoing faintly with moans. You move to help consolidate positions, ready supplies, and check for stragglers. The day's fighting may have ended, but the war's work, tending, cleaning, shoring up, is relentless. You realize the grind is endless. Survival isn't a reward. It's just a continuous act of refusal against entropy and death. As dusk settles, the first stars pierce the smoke. You slump against a tree, grateful for shade and stillness, and remember the odd, quiet moments that make this bearable. A comrade's shared joke, a song hummed quietly in mess, a hand offered without words. These little lights remind you that even amid horror, human resilience persists. You close your eyes briefly, letting exhaustion take its claim, and whisper to yourself that tomorrow will come, as merciless as today, yet filled with the same fragile glimmers of hope. Dawn breaks with a thin, pale light that that feels almost apologetic for the horrors it reveals. You trudge out of your makeshift camp, feet sinking into frost-hardened mud, shoulders stiff from the previous day's endless motion. A cold wind snakes through the treetops, carrying with it the metallic scent of blood and powder. It's not a smell you'll ever forget, and not one that will fade from the fabric of your uniform either. You probably won't survive this, your mind mutters with that weary blend of dread and sarcasm you've begun to rely on. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time. It's comforting to remember the world exists beyond the smoke and mud. The camp is a frenzy of activity despite the lingering exhaustion. Men sharpen bayonets, mop rifles, and squint at maps, trying to divine scents from the chaos that surrounds them. Horses stamp impatiently, whinnying and kicking at the frost-crusted ground. You find yourself marveling, as you always do, at how quickly humans can adapt to constant terror, how swiftly routine can emerge even when the world seems determined to burn. Historians still argue whether soldiers' mental resilience or sheer necessity was the primary survival tool, and you don't blame them. There's little logic in the way courage and fear intertwine. Breakfast is barely a concept, a tin cup of tepid coffee, and a biscuit that could double as a doorstop. Yet there's an odd camaraderie in sharing it with men whose faces are smeared with soot and grime. One soldier, his teeth chattering from the morning chill, swears by a magical technique of softening hardtack in creek water for 10 minutes. He swears it makes it taste like cake. You laugh quietly, partly at the absurdity, partly at how much you'd trade for actual cake. Orders come down that you are to hold a ridge, while the enemy probes your left flank. You trudge uphill, boots sloshing in mud, rifle clutched with trembling hands. The ridge is slick with frost, and the wind whips your coat around like a sail. Up here, the world is sharper, every sound amplified, the snap of a twig, the rustle of a coat, the distant boom of cannon fire. You remind yourself that every step matters, even if the steps are measured in terror and hesitation. You take position behind a line of makeshift breastworks, trees felled and stacked to create a crude barrier. Smoke curls along the ground, a ghostly ribbon weaving through the pines. Ahead, you can see enemy scouts, cautious and curious, like predators testing the perimeter of a trap. You swallow hard, imagining that if luck is a currency, you're spending every coin you have today. Some soldiers carry trinkets or charms tucked into their pockets, a lock of hair, a coin, a carved bead, tiny bets against fate. Quirky, yes, but somehow comforting. The first volley rings out, bullets whistling through the trees. Your chest tightens, fingers clenching the rifle, the rhythm of fear and training colliding. Around you, men shout commands, bark encouragement, or curse the wind for carrying the sound of death. You duck instinctively, counting the seconds between the whistling bullets and the distant boom of artillery, each interval a strange kind of metronome for survival. A wounded soldier collapses near your feet, groaning as you scramble to assist. Mud caked on his uniform, blood seeping through the fabric, you remember tales of battlefield first aid that seem absurdly optimistic in theory, but terrifying in reality. Historians still argue whether battlefield care or the rapid evacuation of wounded influenced survival rates more. Right now, it's a question of which hand steadies the bandage and which one suppresses the bile rising in your throat. The skirmish ebbs and flows, the ridge a battlefield of light and shadow. You note the precise chaos, smoke weaving between trees, the gleam of musket barrels, men crouched or flat against the mud. Time stretches, elastic and disorienting. You recall the quirky detail about soldiers writing secret letters home in the dirt using sticks, sometimes an "I love you," sometimes a barely coherent plea for mercy, and wonder who reads them, if anyone ever does. The midday sun weakly pierces the smoke, casting long, strange shadows over the battlefield. You trudge along the line, distributing water, adjusting hats, whispering courage. You note the tiny human dramas amid the violence: a soldier sharing his scarf with a shivering comrade, a boy polishing a bullet as if it were gold, a man muttering poetry under his breath. These little gestures feel like rebellion against the madness, tiny proofs that human kindness persists. By late afternoon, the enemy retreats slightly, giving you a momentary reprieve. You slump behind your breastwork, breathing in the mixture of smoke, dirt, and frost. The quiet is deceptive, an interlude before the next torrent. You feel the ache in every muscle, the soreness in your jaw from clenching teeth in anticipation, the faint throb in your temples from adrenaline and exhaustion. And yet, somehow, you are still moving, still alive, still aware of the ridiculous, fragile humor that keeps you tethered to sanity. As night begins to fall, lanterns flicker in camp, and men huddle around small fires, sharing whispered stories and shivering against the cold. You rest your rifle nearby, warm hands cupped around a tin cup, staring into the dancing flames. You think of home, of streets and hearths that seem impossibly distant. The battle is not over, not truly, but for now the world contracts to the space between the fire and your tired body, and that is enough. You lay down in the mud, shivering and sticky with grime, staring up at the smoke-marred sky. Tomorrow will come, relentless and indifferent, yet tonight there's a fragile pause. You remind yourself of the small victories, the breaths taken, the comrades aided, the enduring flicker of hope in a world that demands endurance above all else. And as your eyelids droop, you allow yourself a fleeting smile at surviving another day, bizarre as it may seem. Morning arrives in a haze of fog and frost, softening the edges of a world that still smells sharply of gunpowder and damp earth. You trudge through the muck toward the mess area, boots heavy, coat stiff with congealed mud from yesterday's skirmish. You probably won't survive this, your mind mutters, though your voice is quiet now, barely a hum under the weight of exhaustion. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time. It's oddly comforting to map yourself somewhere beyond the fog and chaos. The morning ritual is grim, but oddly grounding. Men grumble over coffee, scrape at the frozen porridge with spoons, and check over rifles, counting bullets and muttering about yesterday's near misses. You join the rhythm, performing familiar tasks with a weary precision that borders on instinct. Some soldiers carry small charms. Tiny carved wooden horses press coins, scraps of fabric, as if magic could buy an extra heartbeat, an extra chance to survive. Historians still argue whether morale or strategy influenced outcomes more, and you think, in this mud-soaked moment, it's a bit of both, plus pure luck. Orders arrive that you are to scout a nearby ridge for enemy activity. You trudge forward, rifle in hand, breath pluming in the icy air. Each step is a negotiation with the mud and frost, each movement measured to avoid snapping twigs or alerting foes. Your senses sharpen, cataloging the chatter of birds, the subtle shift in wind, the distant crunch of boots on frozen earth. The world is alive, insistent, and indifferent to your fear. Reaching the ridge, you crouch behind a fallen log, scanning for movement. The fog hides much, but you catch glimpses of enemy scouts weaving through the trees, cautious and deliberate. You whisper to yourself, practicing the jokes you'd tell later if you survive, like the one about a soldier who mistook a tree stump for a musket, morbid humor that somehow keeps panic at bay. Suddenly, a volley erupts, echoing off the ridge and sending birds flapping skyward. You drop, heart hammering, fingers fumbling with the rifle. Smoke curls around the trunks like ghostly fingers, and you feel the weight of each breath, the tension of each second. Nearby, comrades shout commands, curse, and laugh nervously, an unsettling chorus that reminds you of how close life and death intertwine here. A young soldier stumbles beside you, mud streaked across his uniform, eyes wide with terror. You offer him a hand, murmuring something about getting through this together, a phrase that feels both absurdly hopeful and necessary. You recall the quirky practice of soldiers carving initials into trees or rocks, a small mark of existence amid chaos, tiny rebellions against the consuming machinery of war. The ridge fight stretches for hours, bullets whistling, shells thudding into earth, men shouting, falling, rising again. You trudge through the rhythm, adjusting positions, helping the wounded, marking the terrain with chalk and mud to note hazards. Your mind cycles between observation, memory, and quiet jokes you don't quite say aloud. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? A habit that threads sanity through absurdity. By late afternoon, the fog begins to lift, revealing the wreckage left in the wake of the skirmish. Trampled earth, broken branches, spent bullets glinting in the sun, and scattered personal effects of those who didn't make it. You move carefully, mindful of the human cost, noting the small gestures of kindness, a dropped scarf wrapped around a fallen comrade, a shared flask of water, whispered encouragements that somehow survive the roar of combat. As night falls, you return to camp, boots squelching in mud, hands numb, body aching. Lanterns flicker along the paths, and men huddle around small fires, sharing stories, drying clothes, and sometimes laughing to keep the madness at bay. You find your spot, settle into the familiar discomfort of a blanket over mud, and allow your mind to drift, imagining home, imagining quiet, imagining survival as a strange kind of victory. The day ends with the soft rhythm of distant gunfire, the muted groans of the wounded, and the cold wind carrying whispers through the trees. You close your eyes briefly, letting the fog of exhaustion settle over you, knowing tomorrow will demand the same vigilance, the same endurance, the same impossible balance between fear and fleeting humor. Yet for now, you rest, holding on to the fragile thread of survival. The dawn is sharp and merciless, slicing through the smoky haze that lingers over the encampment like a stubborn memory. You trudge out of your tent, blanket tucked around your shoulders, trying to ignore the ache in your knees and the rawness of your hands. Today promises marching orders, and you know that every step forward is a negotiation with fatigue, hunger, and the gnawing awareness that any misstep could be your last. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, share your location and local time. There's something grounding about pinning yourself somewhere safe while the world outside burns. Breakfast is a meager affair, coarse bread, cold coffee, and the occasional hardtack that threatens to chip teeth if bitten wrong. Around you, the men complain, stretch, and check their gear, muttering about yesterday's skirmish, about officers who give orders they can't enforce, and about the general absurdity of being alive at all in such circumstances. You smile faintly at the absurdity. It's a necessary mental defense. Historians still argue whether morale or equipment failures cause more casualties in these smaller engagements, and in your mud-caked shoes, you understand why the debate is endless. Orders are handed down. A march to reinforce a defensive position along a wooded ridge. The air is heavy with anticipation, and the metallic tang of cordite lingering from distant artillery. You trudge in formation, boots sinking into churned-up mud, the occasional stick snapping underfoot. The landscape is a study in muted colors, russet leaves, charcoal trunks, pale gray sky. But the occasional splash of indigo or saffron in a comrade's scarf punctuates the monotony. Quirky soldiers fashion hats from old flour sacks or carve initials into trees along the route. tiny acts of personal expression in an otherwise regimented world. As the column approaches the ridge, musket fire erupts suddenly, echoing between trees and sending birds scattering. You drop instinctively, heart hammering, rifle clutched, ears ringing with the gunpowder smell that has become almost familiar, almost comforting in its consistency. Nearby, a sergeant calls orders, voice cutting through the chaos like a whip. You mimic his movements, ducking, firing, signaling, all while managing a sarcastic internal monologue about how the general probably drank his coffee too strong this morning. Humor becomes an essential armor against panic. The battle stretches long, with flares of conflict appearing and disappearing like sparks along the forest floor. Men shout, fall, rise, and move again. Each second is a negotiation with survival and duty. You notice small acts of humanity. One soldier covers another with a tattered coat. A pair of hands offer water to a bleeding comrade. A faint whispered prayer escapes someone crouched behind a tree. Tiny, fragile threads of normalcy in a world turned upside down. By mid-afternoon, the ridge is secured, but the ground is littered with evidence of the day's fury. Spent cartridges, dropped knapsacks, trampled foliage, and the occasional discarded personal effect, a locket, a hat, a letter soaked in mud. You trudge among them, careful not to disturb the dead more than necessary, your mind cataloging every detail, every smell, every sound, as if imprinting them for survival's sake. Evening falls with an eerie quiet, broken only by distant artillery and the low murmurs of exhausted men. You return to camp, boots soaked, hands chapped, body trembling from exertion and adrenaline. Lanterns flicker, casting long shadows across the muddy ground. Around small fires, men dry socks, swap stories, and offer laughter, small, rebellious bursts of life in the midst of chaos. You curl under your blanket, letting the day's tension dissolve slightly, eyes closing to the rhythm of distant gunfire and whispered jokes. In these fleeting moments of rest, you allow yourself to imagine home, warmth and quiet, knowing that tomorrow the cycle will begin again. And yet, despite the mud, the cold, the relentless strain, there is a stubborn pulse of defiance within you, a refusal to be fully broken by the daily grind of survival, a tiny ember of hope flickering amid smoke and blood. The morning is humid, clinging to your skin like a second layer you never asked for. You haul yourself out of the damp tent, shoulders stiff from uneven sleep, and immediately notice the pungent aroma of unwashed bodies mingled with campfires and the faint, lingering coppery scent of yesterday's blood. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, share your location and local time. It's oddly comforting to know someone somewhere is sipping tea while you trudge through mud and misery. Today you march toward a river crossing, a place where infantry and cavalry alike have struggled under both water and enemy fire. Historians still argue whether such logistical maneuvers were as deadly as pitched battles, but with waterlogged boots, soggy uniforms, and the constant threat of bullets, you feel like the debate has no real answer. Your own aching muscles and the shouts of men seem sufficient evidence of danger. Small quirks surface even here. Soldiers fashion rafts out of barrels, carve crude playing cards from scraps of wood, and share stories about invisible ghosts in the mist. It's remarkable how human absurdity persists, even when life feels precarious. The river itself is deceptively calm, a glassy surface belying the mud-slick banks and the hidden currents that could sweep you under before you notice. You wade in, musket raised, fingers numb, watching comrades slip and curse as they navigate the treacherous shallows. Someone shouts a warning about snakes, likely exaggeration, but the sheer possibility is enough to make you flinch. A small, quirkily humorous debate sparks over who should cross first, Everyone has an opinion, and each opinion feels equally crucial, absurdly so. Midway through, enemy sharpshooters appear along the far bank, forcing a chaotic scramble for cover. You dive behind a rock, hard hammering, trying to steady the musket's kick, while watching a nearby horse panic and drag its rider through the mud. You mutter sarcastically about how the cavalry clearly skipped basic equestrian classes this morning, even as you focus on breathing, staying low, and signaling others. Moments like this teach you that humor is survival, an absurd shield against terror. Across the river, the battle turns into a brutal negotiation of terrain. Waist-deep water, slippery mud, and the constant snap of twigs underfoot make each step feel perilous. You notice little things, the reflection of sunlight on a bayonet, the faint cry of a trapped dog, the worried expression of a comrade with a makeshift sling. These details embed themselves in your memory, an unspoken ledger of both beauty and horror. Quirky observation. Someone has tied a small mirror to their knapsack, perhaps hoping to glimpse approaching danger, perhaps just preserving a fragment of vanity. By evening, the crossing is completed, the ridge beyond occupied, and your body is drenched, exhausted, and stiff with cold. Campfires are hastily lit, rations distributed, and men settle for the uneasy comfort of warmth, complaining, swapping small jokes, and carving initials into the wooden planks of makeshift shelters. You curl into your blanket, thinking about home, the absurdity of your own complaints versus the real dangers faced, and how each river, each ridge, each day becomes a trial that leaves marks beyond the physical. As darkness falls, the gentle lapping of water against the riverbank serves as a lullaby, if you can ignore the occasional distant artillery boom. You close your eyes, letting the fatigue claim you, carrying along with it small, precious hope that somehow the day's endurance, absurdities, and tiny acts of bravery might add up to something greater than survival alone. Dawn arrives sticky and gray, dripping through the canvas of your tent and chilling you before your boots even touch the ground. You trudge past rows of tents, the air thick with the mingled smells of wet wool, smoke, and last night's damp straw, and wonder, briefly and bitterly, if anyone has ever actually slept well in a military encampment. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time, because right now, even imagining someone else sitting comfortably is a small comfort. Today's ordeal is a forced march over rolling hills, the kind that seems innocent from a distance, but devours you step by step. Historians still argue whether forced marches killed as many soldiers as open battle, and honestly, you think it's a fair debate, especially as your calves scream and every rock in the path feels like a personal vendetta. Small absurdities emerge. Someone has tied a tin cup to their belt for unknown reasons, and another soldier is trying to balance a loaf of bread atop his knapsack, as if gravity will obey a soldier's logic. You snort, shaking your head, and immediately regret giving away any energy to laughter. The landscape stretches endlessly, fields alternating between mud-churned pastures and scrubby woodland. You trudge through knee-high grass, boots sucking with every step, muttering about how you would rather wrestle an angry bull than navigate another mile of this terrain. Nearby, the commander barks orders, and you realize that in theory the chain of command exists, but in practice, it's more like a cacophony of voices competing with the groans of your own muscles. A fringe tidbit. Someone swears that marching while humming keeps mosquitoes at bay, and a small debate ensues about whether the theory counts as science or just desperate hope. Mid-March, the sun peeks through a break in clouds, highlighting the sweat on your neck and the streaks of mud on your face. You notice the quiet heroism in small acts, a soldier helping another lace his boot, a man sharing a scrap of bread, or someone adjusting the strap of a child-sized uniform, a drummer boy. These moments are faint, fleeting sparks of humanity, but they persist. The forced march is also oddly musical. The rhythm of boots on soft soil becomes a heartbeat punctuated by groans, curses, and occasional laughter. By midday, the column reaches a shallow stream. Water is a bomb, but crossing it requires coordination, balance, and careful eyeing of slippery stones. You notice one soldier balancing on a log like a circus performer while carrying a bundle of rations, and you can't help a dry, muttered joke. Ah yes, Olympic log walking, Civil War edition. Amid the humor, there's serious danger too. A misstep could lead to twisted ankles or worse, a soaking that will chill you through hours of the march yet to come. Evening finds you at a makeshift bivouac, bodies aching, faces streaked with mud, and everyone leaning on humor and absurd anecdotes to survive the mental grind. Someone recounts a story about a robed chicken wandering into the camp and being mistaken for a spy, a reminder that even amidst misery, life insists on small, ridiculous interruptions. You collapse into a blanket, listening to the soft whisper of leaves and the occasional distant shout, feeling the mix of exhaustion, relief, and odd camaraderie that makes you realize survival is as much about the small absurdities as the big horrors. Night comes quietly, and as you lay staring at the patchwork sky visible through the tent flap, you think about the miles ahead and the resilience it will require. You draw a shaky but genuine breath, letting it carry a whisper of hope that every mile, every absurdity endured, shapes a story of endurance that will linger far beyond the muddy fields of today. Morning breaks unevenly, filtered through wet canvas and the persistent chill of a night that seemed longer than it was. You trudge out from your shelter, shoulders stiff, every joint announcing itself like a personal drumline, and remember that coffee is a luxury, not a right. You probably won't survive this without some mental gymnastics, but hey, that's half the point. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And yes, post your location and local time, so I can feel mildly connected to the rest of the world beyond this foggy, muddy encampment. Today, the battle is not one of muskets, but of logistics, the endless shuffling of supplies, horses, and men across a landscape that seems to conspire against you. Historians still argue whether the march to supply lines cost more lives than bullets, and you're beginning to understand why. Every step seems designed to expose weakness, from slippery roads to stubborn wagons. Fringe detail. Someone has attached a small flag to a mule in hopes of warding off bad luck, and your mind can't help but wonder if the mule cares about superstition. By midday, you reach a crossroads with wagons piled high, horses snorting, and officers waving maps like sacred scrolls. You catch the absurdity of it all. Men arguing over directions while the sun beats down mercilessly, and yet the world beyond the battlefield continues, unaware of the chaos you trudge through. Someone whispers that a nearby blacksmith's hammer has started a rhythmic accompaniment to the groans and shouts, a percussive soundtrack to misery. You laugh quietly, knowing the absurdity will become a survival tactic. Lunch is a brief reprieve, a soggy biscuit and salted pork eaten under a tree with roots that are either cruelly placed or providentially sturdy, depending on how desperate your back feels. Soldiers share stories, some true, some wildly exaggerated. One claims a squirrel stared him down for 15 minutes before retreating, and the small debate arises, animal intelligence or bored imagination. You find yourself distracted, counting the small victories, a dry boot, a shared laugh, a stomach that hasn't revolted yet. Afternoon brings orders to reassemble and march toward the next encampment. You notice the camaraderie, the quiet, unspoken agreements, helping a neighbor with a strap, sharing water, trading small comforts. The human element persists amidst exhaustion and mud, reminding you that survival is rarely solitary. You catch a fringe fact. Some soldiers carried small tokens from home, tucked in their sleeves or hats, tiny reminders of a world untouched by this chaos. As dusk approaches, you arrive at a ridge overlooking the distant town you will soon pass. The sun sets in muted reds and ochres, painting a landscape both beautiful and haunting, a reminder that even in the brutality of war, moments of aesthetic wonder insist on existing. You sink to the ground, boots caked with mud, feeling the rhythm of marching feet around you, a pulse, a heartbeat shared by hundreds, each echoing the quiet, stubborn perseverance that will define your days here. Night falls, bringing with it the chorus of distant owls, whispered conversations, and the occasional clink of tin cups. You curl into your blanket, letting the exhaustion dissolve into the rhythm of the camp, recognizing that today's endurance, today's absurdities, and today's small kindnesses are the invisible scaffolding holding you upright for whatever comes next. Dawn is a reluctant visitor, peeking through tattered tents and the lingering fog of the previous night. You trudge from your sleeping spot, muscles stiff and protesting every move, and immediately remember that breakfast isn't a guarantee. It's a hope, usually half grainy, half soggy, and always lacking the comforting aroma you imagine from home. You probably won't survive this day without a mental pep talk, but that's what makes each moment of persistence feel like a quiet victory. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time, so I can pretend we're sipping tea together somewhere less muddy. Today's march leads through a forested path, the mud sucking at your boots as if it knows you're a newcomer to suffering. Historians still argue whether marching through dense woods was a strategic necessity or an almost intentional form of torment for weary soldiers, and right now you're inclined to believe the latter. Fringe detail, tiny saplings have been bent in curious shapes, forming natural arches that seem to mock your slow progress, like nature's own game of how much can we frustrate them. By late morning, you encounter a supply halt near a shallow stream. Water trickles over pebbles, surprisingly clear, and you realize that washing your face and hands in this modest creek feels like a luxury. Soldiers gather to drink and scrub, sharing rumors of battles past and battles yet to come. One claims that if you whisper a wish to the water and toss a pebble in, it will grant safety from a next skirmish, a superstition you half believe, half laugh at, but mostly it distracts from the ache in your calves. Lunch is a sparse affair, often interrupted by officers shouting orders and the occasional tumble of a wagon wheel. You eat mechanically, chewing over the absurdity of ration planning and the grim reality of hunger that is never quite satisfied. Some carry small trinkets from home, a worn handkerchief, a carved figurine, a pressed flower. These objects are not just sentimental, they're talismans, little shields against the relentless pace of camp life. The afternoon brings the first sound of distant cannon fire. You trudge toward the battlefield with a mixture of dread and grim determination, noting the tension that hangs over everyone like a heavy fog. You observe the coordination, or lack thereof, between units, realizing that chaos is sometimes the most accurate descriptor of organized warfare. Someone whispers that the officers are using mirrored signals to communicate, a method that seems brilliant in theory and nearly impossible in execution. You marvel at how improvisation becomes a survival skill, often overshadowing strategy. As evening approaches, the sun dips low, casting long shadows across the churned soil and scattered debris. You pause to take in the vista, a war-torn landscape softened by twilight, a strange juxtaposition of brutality and serenity. The smell of smoke and wet earth lingers, and somewhere nearby, a soldier hums a faint tune, reminding you that even in the chaos of combat, humanity persists. You trudge on, aware that nightfall will not bring peace, but a different kind of vigilance, listening, waiting, enduring. Nightfall finally settles, bringing the chorus of crickets, distant shouts, and the occasional whistle from sentries. You crawl into a tent, your body sore but your mind alive with the day's lessons in endurance, absurdity, and fleeting beauty. Each step, each breath, each minor act of care, like sharing a tin cup of water or a whispered joke, becomes a lifeline, a testament to the resilience required to simply survive another day. You awaken to a morning that smells sharply of smoke and damp wool, your blanket stiff from dew, and your body aching in ways that make you wonder if anyone outside this life could truly understand. You trudge through the familiar ritual of preparing for another day of marching, skirmishing, and somehow pretending that courage comes naturally. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to post your location and local time, so I can imagine we're in distant places, enduring the same sun and rain. The day begins with a recon mission, scouting the ridges ahead for enemy movement. Historians still argue whether reconnaissance in the Civil War often saved lives or simply prolonged suffering, and in this moment, the distinction feels academic as your boots sink into the churned earth. Fringe detail. The ground is littered with leaves that have been pressed into strange, intricate patterns by passing feet, almost like natural hieroglyphs marking the paths of countless soldiers before you. Your unit moves cautiously, ears tuned to the faintest crack of a twig or the whisper of wind through the trees. The tension is palpable, each man and woman acutely aware that a single misstep could lead to a skirmish from which few would emerge unscathed. You notice small details, the glint of a musket lock in the sunlight, the peculiar tilt of a hat worn too far forward, a horse shivering nervously in its harness, and they all register as silent signals in this elaborate game of survival. By midday, the orders shift from cautious observation to advancing into a small town rumored to be lightly defended. Mud and horse droppings make every step heavier, and your stomach, still weak from yesterday's rations, reminds you that the body has its own agenda regardless of duty or courage. The streets are eerily quiet, broken only by the creak of wagons and the occasional bark of a stray dog. One soldier swears that if you toss a coin into a fountain at the town square, it brings luck, a superstition that makes you smirk while you wonder why humans cling to hope in chaos. Lunch is stolen in corners of alleyways or behind shattered fences. The food is meager, a piece of hardtack, a hunk of salted meat, a sip of water that tastes faintly of iron. You share small jokes with your comrades, trading grim humor about mud-stained boots and officers who never seem to notice the difference between bravery and exhaustion. These tiny moments of levity are lifelines, reminders that even amid the relentless grind of war, laughter remains a stubborn, defiant flame. Afternoon brings the first real engagement of the day. Skirmishes along the outskirts, musket fire cracking against the background of shouted orders and trampled fences. You move with a combination of instinct and discipline, feeling the tension in your chest, the adrenaline sharpening every sense. Someone mutters that the town's bell tower is a perfect lookout, and you find yourself wondering if they're speaking strategically or merely passing time while avoiding the chaos. Every movement is measured, every glance loaded with the potential for catastrophe. Evening descends with a sense of surreal calm. Smoke from distant fires curls into the sky, mingling with twilight's pale gold and lavender. You pause to watch, noticing how the chaos of battle contrasts with the delicate beauty of the setting sun. There's a fleeting thought that perhaps the world outside the war still holds moments of grace, and for a brief second, you almost believe it. Night will bring a tense vigil, but for now, the horizon offers a quiet reminder that endurance has its rewards, however subtle. You settle into a temporary camp, tending to blisters, mending frayed straps, and sharing quiet stories with those around you. The camaraderie is fragile but essential, a tether to humanity, in a world that demands constant vigilance. Every action, from the smallest repair to the whispered joke about yesterday's mishap, is a thread in the tapestry of survival, a quiet assertion that even in the face of relentless brutality, life persists. The dawn arrives with a muted gray light, the kind that doesn't promise warmth, only another stretch of endless marching. You trudge along the narrow road, shoulders hunched, coat damp from overnight dew, and the rhythm of boots striking mud becomes almost hypnotic. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Don't forget to share your location and local time, imagining us scattered across the globe, yet bound in this shared journey lends a peculiar sense of connection amid the chaos. Your orders are to hold a ridge overlooking a valley rumored to conceal enemy movement. Historians still argue whether the strategic importance of holding high ground truly outweighed the lives lost in its defense, and as you ascend, the debate feels less academic and more painfully real. Fringe detail. You notice that tiny wildflowers cling stubbornly to the rocky slope, a small defiance of life against the upheaval of war. It's absurdly poetic, and you find yourself momentarily distracted by it, marveling at resilience in miniature form. By midday, the enemy appears, a distant line of blue coats glinting faintly in the sun. The officers bark orders, the crack of musket fire begins, and suddenly the world condenses into sharp sounds and sudden movements. You move instinctively, ducking behind crumbling stone walls and hauling your rifle with sweaty, trembling hands. Every shot feels heavier than the last, your heart pounding with a rhythm that is half fear, half adrenaline, and entirely consumed with the singular task of survival. Lunch is another half-hearted affair, swallowed hastily as you crouch in trenches and hollows. Hardtack tastes like sawdust, but you force it down. A fellow soldier jokes that the rationing is designed to make you appreciate air, and you chuckle despite the ache in your stomach. The conversation is fleeting, fragile, a thin tether to normalcy, but reminds you that even here, life maintains a strange insistence on continuation. The afternoon stretches on with sporadic skirmishes, officers shouting commands that vanish into the cacophony of gunfire and clashing steel. You witness both bravery and panic, often in the same body, as comrades stumble, rise, and stumble again. One young recruit keeps muttering about seeing the enemy as ghosts in the haze, and you can't help but relate. Visibility is poor, morale is low, and imagination is forced into grotesque forms by exhaustion and fear. As dusk falls, the ridge quiets, leaving only the distant rumble of cannon fire and the groan of wounded soldiers. You tend to your own minor injuries, apply water to scorched cloths, and reflect on the day's absurd mixture of terror and ritualized routine. Some of your fellows exchange whispered stories of home, recipes, jokes, memories of simpler days, and these fragments of normal life are precious in a world otherwise defined by smoke, mud, and relentless uncertainty. Night brings a fragile, uneasy rest. You lie on cold ground trying to sleep while listening to the rhythm of distant fires and the occasional cry of sentries. Thoughts wander to those who didn't make it, to the unpredictability of fortune in battle, and to the uncanny way that tiny gestures, sharing a blanket, a joke, a morsel of food, have kept spirits alive. You ponder the resilience of humans in extremis, the subtle defiance that allows life to cling to the edges of destruction. In these hours of quiet, you begin to understand that endurance is both strategy and art. Every breath, every cautious step, every whispered encouragement to a fellow soldier is a rebellion against the relentless machinery of war. Even the smallest victories, securing a stretch of ridge, helping a comrade to a better vantage, surviving the day, feel monumental, proof that persistence can exist amid chaos. As you drift towards sleep, The battlefield fades into shadow, leaving only impressions of courage, horror, camaraderie, and fleeting beauty. The memory of wildflowers on rocky slopes, laughter shared in trenches, and the surreal quiet of dawn above a muddy road lingers in the mind, a testament to the complexity of human experience even in war's most brutal hours. And though tomorrow promises more exertion, more uncertainty, and more endurance, you close your eyes with the faint, stubborn hope that each day survived is itself a kind of victory. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into calm. Imagine the battlefield softened, the smoke rising slowly into a pastel sky, the mud drying to a gentle, forgetful brown. Hear the whispers of comrades long gone carried on a breeze that brushes your cheeks like a lullaby, and let your shoulders release the weight they've carried so faithfully. Visualize the wildflowers once pressed against rocks, their stubborn persistence now a quiet symbol of resilience, and breathe in the peace that follows the storm. Picture yourself stepping away from trenches, leaving behind the echo of commands, the crack of musket fire, the ache in every limb. Feel the sun warming your face instead of scorching your back. Hear birdsong instead of cannon. And know that the endurance, courage, and tiny acts of humanity you've imagined are not forgotten. They live on in the quiet corners of history and in your own mind. Allow each breath to slow, each thought to soften. You've walked through mud, smoke, and endless tension. You've felt fear, exhaustion, and fleeting triumphs. Now you can let the images dissolve into gentle shadows, leaving only calm and a soft, lingering awe at what humans endure and survive. The past rests, you rest. The night carries away the echoes, and peace settles softly around you. Sweet dreams,